In the vast expanse of the galaxy, two mighty alien races have been locked in a bitter war for centuries. The Zorgans, with their advanced biotechnology and psionic abilities, clashed against the Krillix, masters of cybernetics and quantum engineering. Their ships, armed with world-shattering weapons, danced a deadly ballet across the stars, leaving trails of destruction in their wake. Despite the awesome power each side wielded, neither could gain a decisive advantage over the other. The Zorgans' regenerative hulls and mind-reading sensors were evenly matched by the Krillix' self-repairing nanoswarms and AI-guided missiles. Planets were conquered and reconquered, fleets assembled and annihilated, but the stalemate persisted. The rest of the galactic community watched from a cautious distance, unwilling to provoke the ire of either belligerent. The smaller, weaker races huddled in their own star systems, hoping the conflagration would pass them by. Neutrality was the watchword of the day, as the costs of choosing a side were too high to contemplate. Amidst this age of strife, a young race was quietly rising on the galactic periphery. Humanity, having only recently achieved faster-than-light travel, was taking its first tentative steps into the wider universe. United under the banner of the Terran Confederation, they established outposts and colonies on the handful of habitable worlds within reach of their home system. At first, the Zorgans and Krillix paid little attention to the upstart humans. Their energies were consumed by the all-encompassing demands of the war, and a species that had yet to even make contact with another sentient race seemed beneath their notice. But as human ships began ranging further afield, and their technology advanced at a surprising rate, that calculation started to change. The Zorgan High Command was the first to appreciate humanity's potential. The Terran Confederation's rapid expansion and aptitude for innovation reminded them of their own race's early history. In the humans, they saw a possible solution to the intractable deadlock of the war. The humans are still primitive, but they learn quickly, observed General Zoloff, the Zorgans' chief strategist. Their technology is generations behind ours, but they are already reverse engineering the scraps they've scavenged from our battles. Given time and resources, they could become a formidable force. Are you suggesting we ally with them? Asked Admiral Varric, incredulous. They are little more than savages, crawling in the mud of their birth world. What could they possibly offer us? A new perspective, Zoloff replied. The Krillix have grown accustomed to our tactics, just as we have to theirs. The humans fight differently. They are unpredictable, unconventional, and they breed prodigiously. An infusion of fresh troops and new ideas could be exactly what we need to break the stalemate. Varric remained unconvinced, but the other members of the High Command saw the wisdom in Zoloff's proposal. They authorized a covert mission to open talks with the Terran Confederation, to gauge their receptiveness to a possible alliance. As the Zorgan delegation made its way towards human space, a similar conversation was unfolding among the Krillix leadership. The humans are dangerous, insisted Prime Calcular Xanath, the guiding intelligence of the Krillix war effort. Their rate of technological advancement defies all known models. If they continue unchecked, they could disrupt the balance of power. Then we should destroy them now, before they become a threat, declared Executor Thrax, the supreme commander of the Krillix military. A preemptive strike, to eliminate their presence in this sector of the galaxy. That would be unwise, cautioned Xanath. We do not yet know the full extent of their capabilities. An overt attack could provoke them to accelerate their development or worse, push them into an alliance with the Zorgans. No, we must be subtler in our approach. We will infiltrate their society, study their strengths and weaknesses from within. And when the time is right, we will subvert them to our own ends. Thus, as the Zorgans sought to court humanity's favor, the Krillix plotted to undermine them from the shadows. The Terran Confederation, still ignorant of the greater galactic context, suddenly found itself the object of two mighty empires' attention. In the halls of power on Earth, the revelation of intelligent alien life sparked both excitement and trepidation. Some saw an unprecedented opportunity for trade, cultural exchange, and scientific collaboration. Others feared the loss of humanity's hard-won independence, subsumed into the agendas of vastly older and more powerful civilizations. As the debates raged and public opinion oscillated, a small group of visionaries began to see a different path. Led by the charismatic Senator Elena Soltis, they argued that humanity's destiny lay not in subservience to alien powers, but in seizing the mantle of galactic leadership for itself. The Zorgans and the Krillix have fought their war for centuries, and what has it brought them? Soltis demanded in an impassioned speech before the Terran Senate: stagnation, destruction, and endless bloodshed. They come to us now not out of respect, but out of desperation. They see in us a means to prolong their conflict, to feed the insatiable maw of their war machine with human lives and human ingenuity. But I say we reject their poisoned chalice. I say we forge our own path, unbeholden to the ancient grudges and ossified thinking of a galaxy grown weary and cynical. I say we take the fire of human aspiration and carry it to the stars, not as vassals, but as vanguards of a new age. Soltis' words struck a chord with a population yearning for purpose and tired of timidity. Slowly, inexorably, the balance of opinion began to shift. Humanity would engage with the wider galaxy, but on its own terms. It would build its strength, bide its time, and when the moment was right, it would seize its own destiny. And so, as the Zorgan delegation arrived in the Terran system with an offer of alliance, they found a species not overawed by their power, but emboldened by its own potential. The humans listened politely to the aliens' proposal, then countered with terms of their own. A mutual defense pact, yes, but also a sharing of technology, a division of conquered territory, and a recognition of humanity's status as an equal partner. The Zorgans, desperate to secure any advantage in their long war, found themselves with little choice but to accept. And so the deal was struck, and the course of galactic history shifted. Humanity, once an afterthought in the great game of empires, had become a player. But even as the human fleets began marshalling for their first joint campaign with the Zorgans, the Krillix were already in motion. Their agents, long secreted among the human population, began to activate. Saboteurs struck at shipyards and munitions plants, while hidden computer viruses wormed their way into military networks. The Terran Confederation, unused to the utterly ruthless nature of galactic conflict, was caught off guard. But they adapted quickly, rooting out the infiltrators and hardening their defenses. And they learned, absorbing the harsh lessons of a war older than their civilization and vowing never again to be so naive. As the first human warships took their place in the line of battle alongside the Zorgans, a new chapter in the galaxy's blood-stained annals opened. Outnumbered and outgunned, the soldiers of Earth nonetheless brought with them a spirit of daring and innovation that would soon set the stars ablaze. The Krillix and all who beheld humanity's ascent would learn to their peril the truth of an ancient saying, now given new meaning amidst the cosmic carnage. Per aspera ad astra, through hardships to the stars. As the human fleet took its place alongside the Zorgan armada, the Krillix forces arrayed against them could scarcely believe what they were seeing. The newcomers' ships were small and crude compared to the sleek, deadly craft that the older races had honed over centuries of warfare. To the Krillix commanders, the idea that these primitives could tip the balance of the war seemed laughable. But the humans would soon prove them wrong. In the first engagement, a Krillix battle group bore down on a joint Zorgan-human defensive position, confident in their superior numbers and firepower. The human admiral in charge of the sector, a grizzled veteran named Marcus Steele, saw an opportunity in the apparently hopeless situation. Rather than fleeing or hunkering down as the Zorgans urged, Steele ordered his ships to accelerate directly towards the oncoming Krillix forces. The Zorgan commanders watched in disbelief as the human vessels, dwarfed by their alien counterparts, charged headlong into the teeth of the enemy guns. At the last moment, just as the Krillix ships were preparing to eviscerate the upstarts with a full barrage, the human fleet suddenly split apart, each ship veering in a different direction. The Krillix, Their targeting sensors, confused by the unexpected maneuver, hesitated for a crucial instant. In that moment of confusion, the human ships unleashed a volley of their own. Not the expected hail of missiles and energy beams, but a swarm of small, agile drones that had been hidden in their launch bays. The drones, each no larger than a human fighter craft, darted through the Krillic formations, evading their point defense systems and latching onto the hulls of the larger ships. Before the Krillics could respond, the drones detonated, their shaped charges boring deep into the enemy vessel's armor and releasing a payload of nanites that quickly began to devour the ships from the inside out. In a matter of minutes, a third of the Krillic battle group had been reduced to drifting husks. The Zorgans, watching from their own ships, were stunned. They had never seen such a tactic before, and would never have thought to use their own advanced technologies in such an unorthodox way. But the humans, unbound by centuries of rigid doctrine, had improvised a devastating new weapon from the tools at hand. As word of the humans' victory spread, morale surged among the Zorgan-Human alliance. The Krillics, for the first time in generations, found themselves on the defensive, scrambling to adapt to an enemy that refused to play by the old rules. But the Krillics were nothing if not tenacious. Even as they reeled from the humans' audacious attacks, they were already analyzing the data, probing for weaknesses in the upstarts' tactics and technology. And they were quick to exploit any vulnerability they found. In one clash, a Krillic cyber warfare unit managed to penetrate the computer systems of a human battlecruiser, seizing control of its life support and propulsion systems. The crew, trapped helpless in their own ship, could only watch in horror as the vessel was turned against its own allies, its guns blazing a path of destruction through the human lines. But even in defeat, the humans learned and adapted. They hardened their networks, installed redundant command pathways, and developed new encryption protocols that even the Krillic's most advanced AI couldn't crack. And they struck back with cyber attacks of their own, turning the Krillic's own weapons against them. As the war ground on, both sides began to realize that the humans were more than just a temporary distraction or a minor annoyance. They were a force to be reckoned with, a wild card that had the potential to upend the balance of power in the galaxy. For the Zorgans, this realization was a source of growing unease. They had brought the humans into the war as a means to an end, a tool to be used and discarded once their purpose had been served. But as human victories mounted and their influence grew, some among the Zorgan leadership began to fear that they had unleashed something they could no longer control. These fears came to a head during a joint strategy session between human and Zorgan commanders. Admiral Varrock, who had always been skeptical of the alliance, openly questioned the humans' loyalty, suggesting that they might turn on the Zorgans once the Krillics had been defeated. The accusation brought the human delegation to their feet in outrage. "We have fought and died alongside you," declared Admiral Steele, his voice shaking with barely contained fury. "We have shared our technology, our tactics, our very blood. And still you doubt us. Still you treat us as inferiors, as pawns in your grand game." For a moment, it seemed as if the alliance might fracture then and there. But General Zyloth, ever the pragmatist, intervened. "The humans have proven themselves, time and again," he said, his tone conciliatory but firm. "They are not our servants, but our partners, and we will treat them as such." The crisis was averted, but the tension remained, and as the human Zorgan forces pressed their advantage, driving the Krillics back system by system, the cracks in the alliance only deepened. Some human leaders, flush with victory, began to echo Admiral Steele's sentiment, arguing that humanity should assert its own agenda. Freed from the constraints of alien alliances, they pointed to the advanced technology and vast resources that the war had opened up, claiming that humanity's destiny was to rule, not to serve. Others counseled caution, warning that humanity was still the junior partner in the alliance, and that overreaching could provoke a backlash from the Zorgans or other galactic powers. They argued for a more measured approach, one that would secure humanity's place in the cosmos without alienating potential allies. As the debate raged within the halls of the Terran Confederation, The war continued to escalate. The Krillix, their backs to the wall, unleashed ever more desperate and devastating weapons, caring little for the collateral damage they inflicted on civilian populations and neutral worlds. In response, the human-Zorgan alliance was forced to resort to similarly brutal tactics, ranging from orbital bombardments to the use of banned biological agents. The lines between military necessity and war crimes blurred, then vanished entirely. Through it all, the humans remained at the forefront, their courage and ingenuity celebrated by their allies and feared by their enemies. But even as they basked in the glow of victory, many began to wonder at what cost that victory had come. They had entered the war as liberators, champions of a new galactic order. But as the bodies piled up and the atrocities multiplied, some began to ask, were they still the good guys, or had they, in their quest for power and glory, become the very thing they had sworn to destroy? These questions weighed heavily on the mind of Elena Soltis, the once idealistic senator who had helped push humanity onto the galactic stage. As she watched the reports of human soldiers rampaging through conquered worlds, as she listened to the justifications and excuses of her fellow leaders, she felt a growing sense of unease, a feeling that somewhere along the way, they had lost their way. And so, even as the final battles of the war played out and the Krillix Empire crumbled, Soltis began to plan, to lay the groundwork for a new vision of humanity's role in the cosmos, not as conquerors or tyrants, but as builders and peacemakers. It would not be an easy path. There would be resistance from those who had grown accustomed to the spoils of war, who saw humanity's martial prowess as its greatest asset. There would be skepticism from alien races who had come to fear and resent human power. But Soltis was determined. She had helped lead her people into the darkness of war. Now she would guide them back into the light. As the guns fell silent and the smoke cleared, as humanity took its seat at the Galactic Council as a fully fledged great power, Soltis stood before the Terran Congress to deliver a speech that would echo through the ages. "We have won a great victory," she said, her voice ringing out across the chamber. "But let us not forget the price of that victory. Let us not forget the lives lost, the worlds shattered, the ideals compromised. We stand now at a crossroads. We can continue down the path of conquest and domination, becoming the very monsters we once fought against. Or we can choose a different path, one of cooperation and compassion, of using our strength not to subjugate, but to uplift. The choice is ours. The future is ours. Let us seize it with both hands and build a galaxy that our children and our children's children can be proud of." As the applause washed over her and the weight of her own words settled on her shoulders, Soltis allowed herself a moment of hope. The road ahead would be long and hard, but for the first time in years, she dared to believe that a better future was possible. And so, even as the galaxy reeled from the impact of humanity's ascent, even as friend and foe alike whispered of the terrifying power of the Terran juggernaut, a new chapter was beginning. A chapter of healing, of rebuilding, of forging a new path among the stars. The humans had joined the war, and the galaxy had trembled. Now, they would lead the way to peace, and the galaxy would follow. In the aftermath of the Great War, the galaxy was a changed place. The old powers, the Zorgans and the Krillix, were shadows of their former selves, their once mighty fleets reduced to scrap, and their planets burdened with the scars of battle. In their place, a new order had arisen, one dominated by the unexpected victors, the humans. Across the galaxy, the name of Terra was spoken with a mix of awe and fear. The upstart species, which had burst onto the galactic scene mere decades before, had proven itself to be a force to be reckoned with. Their ships, once derided as primitive, now patrolled the spaceways as symbols of authority. Their soldiers, once dismissed as soft and undisciplined, were now hailed as the finest warriors in the known universe. But for all their newfound power and prestige, the humans were a troubled lot. The war had changed them, hardened them in ways they were only beginning to understand. They had seen and done things that would haunt them for generations, and the weight of their actions sat heavily upon their collective conscience. Nowhere was this more evident than in the halls of the Terran Confederation, where the once unified government was fracturing along ideological lines. On one side were the Hawks, led by the charismatic Admiral Steele, who saw humanity's military might as its greatest asset and advocated for an aggressive, expansionist foreign policy. On the other were the Doves, led by Senator Soltis, who believed that humanity had a moral obligation to use its power for good, to heal the wounds of war and build a lasting peace. The debates between the two factions were fierce and unending, with each side accusing the other of naivety, recklessness, or worse. In the end, it was Soltis and her allies who prevailed, thanks in no small part to the growing war weariness among the human population. The people of Terra had tasted victory, but they had also tasted the bitterness of loss and sacrifice, and many longed for a return to normalcy. Under Soltis' leadership, the Terran Confederation embarked on a new course, one focused on diplomacy, trade, and cultural exchange. Human ambassadors were dispatched to every corner of the galaxy, tasked with forging new alliances and mending old wounds. Human scientists and engineers shared their knowledge and technology freely, helping to rebuild shattered worlds and jumpstart stalled economies. At first, many of the alien races were skeptical of humanity's motives, suspecting some kind of trick or trap. But as the years passed and the human efforts bore fruit, attitudes began to shift. The Zorgans, once humanity's closest allies, found themselves drawn into a new partnership, one based on mutual respect and shared goals rather than mere military necessity. Even the Krillix, broken and bitter after their defeat, began to soften their stance, grudgingly accepting human aid and expertise. But not everyone was happy with the new status quo. There were those among the human leadership who chafed at what they saw as a surrender of hard-won gains, a squandering of humanity's potential. Admiral Steele and his followers watched with growing frustration as the Terran Confederation poured resources into foreign aid and peacekeeping missions, while the once mighty human fleet was allowed to languish. Their discontent found an unlikely ally in the form of the Zorgan General Xyloth, who had always harbored reservations about the human alliance. Xyloth saw in Steele a kindred spirit, a warrior who understood the harsh realities of galactic politics. Together, they began to plot and scheme, dreaming of a return to the glory days of the war, when the galaxy had trembled before the might of the human Zorgan alliance. Their opportunity came sooner than anyone expected. On the outskirts of human space, a new threat had emerged. The Vox, a race of insectoid aliens with a hive mind mentality and a ruthless expansionist agenda. The Vox had watched the Great War from afar, biding their time and building their strength. Now, with the major powers weakened and distracted, they saw their chance to strike. The first attacks caught the Terran Confederation completely off guard. Human colonies on the frontier were overrun in a matter of days, their defenses overwhelmed by the sheer numbers and ferocity of the Vox swarms. The human fleet, spread thin by its peacekeeping commitments, struggled to respond, its ships outmatched by the Vox's strange organic technology. As panic spread and the death toll mounted, Admiral Steele saw his moment. In a series of fiery speeches, he denounced the Soltis government as weak and feckless, accusing them of leaving humanity vulnerable to alien aggression. He called for a return to the old ways, for a massive military buildup, and a preemptive strike against the Vox. At first, his words fell on deaf ears. The people of Terra, still weary from the last war, were reluctant to be drawn into another conflict. But as the Vox attacks intensified, and the casualty reports grew more grim, public opinion began to shift. The Hawks, long sidelined by Soltis and her allies, found themselves once again in the ascendant. In a tense emergency session of the Terran Congress, Steele and his supporters forced through a vote of no confidence, toppling the Soltis government and installing a new, more militant leadership. Soltis herself was arrested on trumped-up charges of treason, her pleas for restraint and diplomacy drowned out by the clamor for war. As the human fleet mobilized for battle, General Zoloth reached out to his Vorgan comrades, urging them to join the fight against the Vox. Many were reluctant, still bitter over their diminished status in the post-war order. But Zoloth was persuasive, painting a picture of a galaxy united under human Zorgan rule, with the Vox threat as the catalyst for their resurgence. And so, for the second time in a generation, the galaxy found itself at war. But this time, the lines were blurred, the old alliances fractured. Some of the Zorgans fought alongside their human allies, while others remained neutral or even sided with the Vox. The Krillix, seeing an opportunity for revenge, threw their lot in with the insectoids, their once fearsome fleet reborn as a tool of the hive mind. The conflict that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The Vox, with their ability to rapidly evolve and adapt to new threats, proved to be a formidable foe, their swarms seeming to grow stronger and more numerous with each passing day. The humans and their allies fought back with every weapon at their disposal, from planet-cracking superlasers to genetically engineered super soldiers. But for all their technological and numerical superiority, the allies found themselves steadily losing ground. The Vox seemed to anticipate their every move, countering each strategy with a new and terrifying adaptation. Worlds fell, fleets were scattered, and hope began to fade. In the midst of the chaos, a small group of humans and aliens, led by a recently escaped Senator Soltis, began to work behind the scenes, seeking a way to end the war before it consumed the entire galaxy. They reached out to old friends and former enemies alike, searching for anyone who shared their vision of a universe at peace. And against all odds, they began to make progress. Dissident factions within the Zorgan and Krillix ranks, disillusioned with the endless cycle of violence, agreed to come to the negotiating table. Neutral races, fearing the spread of the conflict, offered to mediate and provide aid. Even some among the Vox, individuals who had managed to break free from the hive mind, expressed a desire for coexistence. But the path to peace was fraught with peril. Admiral Steele and his allies, desperate to maintain their grip on power, branded any talk of negotiation as treason, ordering the arrest or assassination of anyone who dared to dissent. The Vox leadership, sensing weakness, redoubled their attacks, hoping to crush all resistance before a united front could form. As the galaxy teetered on the brink of annihilation, the fate of trillions hung in the balance. The choices made in the coming days and weeks would determine the course of history for generations to come. Would the cycle of war and retribution continue until nothing was left but ashes and regret? Or would the dream of a united, peaceful galaxy finally be realized, rising from the ruins of the old order? Only one thing was certain. The humans, once the outsiders, the underdogs, held the key to the future. As they went, so would go the rest of the universe, for better or for worse. The weight of that responsibility, the burden of that choice, now fell on their shoulders. And in that moment of crisis, as the fires of war raged and the hopes of peace flickered, the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see what path humanity would choose. As the war against the Vox raged on, the Terran Confederation found itself in a state of turmoil. The Hawks, led by Admiral Steele, had seized control of the government, but their grip on power was tenuous at best. Many within the military and the civilian population were uneasy with the new regime, disturbed by its authoritarian tactics and its seeming disregard for the principles that had guided humanity in the post-war era. Senator Soltis and her allies, meanwhile, worked tirelessly behind the scenes, building a coalition of like-minded individuals from across the galaxy. They reached out to the Zorgan dissenters, to the Krillix rebels, and to the handful of Vox who had broken free from the hive mind, forging an unlikely alliance united by a common desire for peace. Their efforts did not go unnoticed. Admiral Steele, growing increasingly paranoid, ordered a crackdown on any suspected dissent. Human and alien alike were rounded up, interrogated, and in some cases, simply disappeared. The once free press was muzzled, Its reporters and editors cowed into silence or replaced with government mouthpieces. But Soltis and her followers would not be intimidated. They continued their work in secret, smuggling messages and resources across the battle lines, laying the groundwork for what they hoped would be a galaxy-wide uprising against the forces of war and oppression. As the conflict ground on, the toll on all sides was immense. The Vox, for all their adaptability, were not invincible. Human and Zorgan scientists, working together in secret labs, developed new weapons and strategies specifically designed to counter the insectoid's strengths. Slowly, painfully, the tide of battle began to turn. But the cost was high. Entire worlds were left in ruins, their populations decimated by the fighting. The human fleet, once the pride of the Terran Confederation, was reduced to a shadow of its former self, its ships and crews pushed to the breaking point by the relentless Vox attacks. And still, Admiral Steele and his allies refused to consider any talk of peace. They poured ever more resources into the war effort, conscripting soldiers and workers from the civilian population, commandeering factories and research facilities to churn out more weapons and ships. Their single-minded focus on victory blinded them to the growing unrest within their own ranks. Many of the human soldiers, especially those from the outer colonies, had little love for the Terran Confederation even before the war. Now forced to fight and die for a government they saw as oppressive and corrupt, their resentment boiled over into open mutiny. On the planet Vostok, a group of colonial troops, led by a charismatic sergeant named Mara Krell, refused orders to deploy to the front lines. Instead, they declared their independence from the Terran Confederation, seizing control of the planet's defenses and infrastructure. Admiral Steele, enraged by this act of defiance, ordered an immediate attack on Vostok. But the colonials, aided by a small group of Zorgan and Krillic volunteers, fought back fiercely, turning the planet's surface into a nightmarish maze of traps and ambushes. As the battle for Vostok raged, Senator Soltis saw her opportunity. She and her allies had been secretly communicating with Sergeant Krell and her followers, offering support and encouragement. Now, with the eyes of the galaxy fixed on the embattled planet, Soltis made her move. In a series of clandestine meetings, she brought together representatives from every major faction in the conflict, from the Terran Hawks to the Vox dissidents. With impassioned speeches and deft diplomacy, she convinced them to agree to a temporary ceasefire, to come together and hash out a plan for ending the war once and for all. It was a fragile alliance, fraught with mistrust and old animosities. But Soltis was relentless, mediating disputes and finding common ground where none seemed to exist. And slowly, inch by painful inch, progress was made. The turning point came when a group of Vox scientists, working in secret, managed to develop a way to sever the hive mind's control over the individual insectoids. With this new technology, they argued, it might be possible to negotiate a true peace with the Vox, one that respected their autonomy and right to self-determination. The idea was met with skepticism from many quarters, not least from the hardliners within the Terran Confederation. But Soltis and her allies seized on it, seeing it as perhaps the last, best hope for ending the cycle of violence and retribution. In a daring raid, a small team of human, Zorgan, and Krillic operatives managed to infiltrate the Vox homeworld, planting the hive mind disruption devices in key locations. The effect was immediate and profound. Across the galaxy, Vox swarms suddenly fell into disarray, individual insectoids breaking free from the collective will and asserting their own desires and goals. The Vox leadership, thrown into chaos by this unexpected development, lashed out in desperate fury. But they were too late. The Allied forces, seizing the moment, launched a coordinated offensive, striking deep into Vox territory and capturing key strategic points. As the Vox defenses crumbled, Admiral Steele and his loyalists made one final desperate gamble. They unleashed a devastating new weapon, a nanotech plague designed to target the Vox on a genetic level, wiping them out once and for all. But the plague, imperfectly designed and hastily deployed, did not discriminate between Vox and non-Vox. It spread like wildfire, infecting humans, Zorgans, and Krillix alike. Within days, entire planets were engulfed, their populations reduced to writhing, screaming husks. In the face of this new horror, even the most stubborn hawks had to admit defeat. The war, already a grinding stalemate, had become an existential threat to all life in the galaxy. The only choice was to lay down arms and work together to find a cure before it was too late. And so, in a historic moment, the leaders of every major faction came together, not to negotiate a truce or a treaty, but to sign a declaration of unconditional peace. The war was over, not because anyone had won, but because everyone had lost. In the aftermath, as the galaxy began the long, slow process of rebuilding, Senator Soltis emerged as the undisputed leader of the new order. She and her allies worked tirelessly to rebuild trust and foster cooperation between the various races and factions, knowing that only through unity could they hope to face the challenges ahead. The Vox, free from the tyranny of the hive mind, were invited to join the galactic community as equals, their unique skills and perspectives valued rather than feared. The Zorgans and the Krillix, humbled by the horrors they had both experienced and inflicted, vowed to put aside their ancient enmities and work together for the common good. And the humans, once the upstarts and the wildcards, took on a new role as the mediators and the peacemakers, using their hard-won wisdom to guide the galaxy towards a brighter future. It would not be an easy road. The scars of the war ran deep, and old habits and prejudices died hard. There would be setbacks and challenges, moments when it seemed that the fragile peace might shatter once again. But always there was hope. Hope in the resilience of life, in the power of compassion and understanding. Hope in the idea that, no matter how dark the night, the dawn would always come. And so, as the galaxy looked to the stars once more, not with fear but with wonder, the story of the humans who had joined the war came to an end. But their legacy, the legacy of a species that had dared to dream of a better way, would endure long after they were gone, a shining beacon of what was possible when sentient beings chose cooperation over conflict, unity over division, and hope over fear. Years had passed since the end of the Great War, and the galaxy had changed in ways that few could have imagined. The old empires, the Zorgans and the Krillix, were no more, their once mighty fleets and armies disbanded, their worlds transformed into thriving centers of trade and culture. The Vox, freed from the tyranny of the hive mind, had become valued members of the galactic community, their unique abilities and perspectives sought after in fields ranging from science to diplomacy. And the humans, the unlikely peacemakers who had helped to bring an end to the cycle of violence and retribution, had taken on a new role as the guardians and facilitators of the new order. Under the wise and compassionate leadership of President Elena Soltis, the Terran Confederation had become a beacon of hope and stability in a galaxy still scared by the wounds of war. But even in this time of peace and prosperity, there were those who yearned for the old ways, who saw the new order as a threat to their power and privilege. On the fringes of human space, a new movement was taking shape, a coalition of disaffected colonials, ambitious warlords, and xenophobic zealots who dreamed of a return to the glory days of human supremacy. Their leader was a man named Alexei Voronov, a former admiral in the Terran fleet who had been dishonorably discharged for his role in war crimes during the conflict with the Vox. Bitter and vengeful, Voronov had retreated to the outer colonies, where he had spent years gathering followers and resources, waiting for the right moment to strike. That moment came on the eve of the 10th anniversary of the war's end, a day that was to be marked by grand celebrations and solemn memorials across the galaxy. On a dozen worlds, Voronov's agents struck without warning, bombing government buildings, sabotaging infrastructure, and assassinating key leaders. The attacks were swift and brutal, designed to sow chaos and fear among the population. But Voronov had underestimated the resilience and determination of the galactic community. Within hours, the Terran fleet had mobilized, joined by ships and troops from a dozen other races, all united in their resolve to defend the hard-won peace. Leading the charge was a figure of legend, a hero of the war who had long since retired from public life, but who had never lost her fighting spirit. Admiral Mara Krell, the rebel leader who had once defied the might of the Terran Confederation on the planet Vostok, had answered the call to arms once more, taking command of a coalition fleet drawn from the ranks of her former allies and adversaries alike. For weeks, the two sides clashed in a series of brutal engagements, with Voronov's forces employing every dirty trick and underhanded tactic they could devise. They used human shields and suicide bombers. They released bioweapons and hacked computer systems. They sowed disinformation and propaganda in an effort to turn the people against their rulers. But Krell and her allies would not be swayed. They fought with a courage and determination that inspired the galaxy, from the lowliest foot soldier to the most exalted leader. They rescued civilians and defended the weak. They exposed lies and championed the truth. They embodied the very best of what the New Order represented. In the end, it was not superior firepower or tactical genius that won the day, but something far more powerful: the unbreakable bonds of friendship and trust that had been forged in the crucible of the Great War. When Voronov's flagship, a massive dreadnought bristling with illegal weapons, jumped into the heart of the coalition fleet, intent on a kamikaze run, it was a Zorgan cruiser that intercepted it, sacrificing itself to save the lives of countless humans and aliens alike. When a team of Voronov's assassins infiltrated the Terran Congress, intent on slaughtering the assembled leaders, it was a Krillic sentinel who sniffed them out, using its heightened senses to detect the telltale signs of nervousness and aggression. And when Voronov himself, cornered and desperate, tried to unleash a doomsday device that would have wiped out half the galaxy, it was a Vox engineer who disarmed it, using knowledge gleaned from the collective memories of its hive-mind ancestors. In that moment, as the last of Voronov's forces laid down their arms, and the people of the galaxy rejoiced in their victory, something profound and beautiful happened. The barriers that had once divided the races, the walls of fear and prejudice and misunderstanding, came tumbling down, replaced by a sense of unity and purpose that transcended all boundaries. Humans and Zorgans, Krillics and Vox, and countless other species besides, all came together in a great celebration of life and hope, a festival of friendship and diversity that would be remembered for generations to come. They danced and sang. They shared stories and laughter. They marveled at the wonders of a galaxy that had once seemed so vast and lonely, but which now felt like home. And at the center of it all, watching with tears of joy and pride in her eyes, was Elena Soltis, the woman who had started it all, the visionary leader who had dared to dream of a better way. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that there would be challenges and setbacks and moments of doubt. But she also knew that they would face those challenges together, as a family, as a community, as a galaxy united in the bonds of love and understanding. As the festivities continued long into the night, Soltis found herself thinking back to the early days of the war, to the fear and uncertainty that had gripped the human race as they ventured out into the stars. She remembered the words of a long-dead poet, a man named Carl Sagan, who had dreamed of a future where humans would take their place among the cosmos, not as conquerors or destroyers, but as explorers and ambassadors of goodwill. "The sky calls to us," Sagan had written. "If we do not destroy ourselves, we will one day venture to the stars." And now, as she looked out over the sea of joyful faces, of humans and aliens alike, all united in their love of life and their hope for the future, Soltis knew that they had done more than just venture to the stars. They had become the stars, shining bright and proud in the firmament of the galaxy, a beacon of hope and inspiration for all who would follow in their footsteps. And so, as the story of the humans who had joined the war came to an end, a new story was just beginning. A story of a galaxy reborn, of a universe filled with wonder and possibility, of a future where the only limit was the reach of their dreams and the strength of their hearts. It was a future that belonged to all of them, human and alien alike, a future that they would build together, one step at a time, one day at a time, until the very stars themselves echoed with the song of their unity and their love.